Hi everybody, our next lesson today is going to be about light meters. So in the past we've talked about shutter speeds, f-stops, depth of field, blurring motion, freezing motion, ISO, a bunch of things. But today let's try and figure out how do we determine what settings to use, right? We can't guess at the exposure and then keep looking at the back of the camera, right? We can use the light meter in the camera to help us determine what our exposure should be, okay? So the light meters in the cameras are quite simple. There's really two ways to measure light, okay? The light meter in these cameras is what's called a reflective meter. Okay? Now, let's examine what a reflective meter does. So if I were to hold up this white piece of paper and you were to take a meter reading off of it, it's going to reflect more light, isn't it? If you were to take a meter reading off of this black cloth, this would reflect less light, wouldn't it? Very good. Well, that's what it does. So the light meter simply measures how much light is reflecting off of whatever you point the camera at, okay? So that's got some pluses and minuses associated to it. So where are you going to take a meter reading off of me? My black pants? Probably not. My shirt? Maybe. Maybe my face? That'd probably be the better place to take a meter reading, would be off of my face, right? So we have to start thinking about when we look at a picture or look at a scene we're going to take a picture of, what are the reflective values of the elements in that frame? Okay? Are they dark? Are they mid-tone like gray? Or are they bright white like this? Well, that makes a difference as to how we interpret what the exposure is going to be and interpret what the light meter is telling us to do. Okay? There's a second way to measure light. And that's using one of these other meters called a handheld meter, okay, or an incident. An incident meter. Now I want you to think of an incident meter as simply like a rain gauge. How much light is falling on this dome? It doesn't matter what the reflective value of the elements or the subject is, it simply tells you how much light is striking this dome on the meter. And you simply, these are very simple to operate, you simply select your ISO and then you hold the button down and it will tell you how much light is available. So these are very handy because this allows you to then take the meter any place you need to in your frame and find out how much light you have over here versus here versus here. So we could actually meter the lighting setup we have in this room pretty easily by going to each light source and seeing how much light we have. Okay? Now, further with these reflective meters in your camera, if we go into our menu screen, under our second menu screen over, and we go down a couple, it says metering mode. And if we punch that up, we get 3 different looking pictures. I'll draw those for you on the board. But what you want to look for are these 3 different looking pictures, okay? And they look something like this. You might see one that has just a couple of eyebrows on it like that. You might see one that has just a circle, and you might see one that has eyebrows and a circle. Okay? And you might again see one that's just an open square, and you might see one that has a dot in the middle, and you might see one that has several areas to meter. Now these have names and they're listed on your camera, so if you're looking for them, it tells you what they are. So this one's called evaluative. The next one is called partial. That's called partial. So this is evaluative. This one's called partial. Sometimes this one's called center. This one's called average. This one's called spot. This one sometimes is called matrix. Now, every camera is a little bit different, and some of the upper level cameras have, again, some of these different metering modes or metering patterns. Now, why do we have these different areas? Well, you may want to use, say, this evaluative, because it's going to weight the center of the picture, and then it's going to average the rest of the scene into your exposure. Well, that's pretty helpful. The spot is only going to measure that little tiny area. Now, that could be really helpful in contrasty situations, say photographing bands or in a club, or maybe some event photography where you've got bright areas and dark areas. Perhaps weddings, this might be a good metering mode to use because the bride and groom are going to be towards the front of the room. It might be a little brighter up there, and where you're photographing from might be a little bit darker. So a spot meter can be a great tool, right, in those contrasty situations. Now, there is one thing that all light meters do. In order for a meter to operate, it must have a reference point to work, okay? The reference point for every light meter in the world is 18% gray, okay? 18% gray. So your goal or your job when you are using your light meter is to not point it at my pants or not point it at something white like this. You want to try and find a midtone, as close to 18% gray as you can find. The top of blue jeans that are decently worn are actually very close to 18% gray. Remember, don't look at the color, look at the value. What is the reflective value of the subject or the scene you're trying to meter? Try to find a midtone. Decently green grass is really close to 18% gray. And in fact, if you're ever out shooting with me, you will see me pointing the camera down at the grass, zooming in, and metering on the grass to try to get an idea how much light I have to work with. Don't point it at the concrete, that's too bright. Don't point it at the asphalt, that's too dark. Find grass. Decently green trees, the leaves on the trees, not underneath the leaf, but on top where the sun is shining on it, is also very close to 18% gray. So your job or your goal is to try and find a midtone. Try and find 18% gray. And then what you want to do is look at your meter, and it will look something like this. It will have a long line, a couple of short lines, a medium line, maybe a couple of short ones, and a really long one again, a couple of short ones, a medium one, a couple of short ones, and a long one. And it may say plus on this side and minus on this side. And what you want to do is try to zero the meter or get it as close to this center line as possible. Okay? Don't worry if it's off just a little bit one way or the other, plus or minus a little bit. You want to try and get your meter as close to the center or zero as possible. And that's why trying to find a midtone to meter off of is critical, right? So back in the day when we shot film, we used our light meters, we used a gray card. We often would even photograph the gray card in our first frame so we had a reference point. Still not a bad practice to do with digital photography if you're going to be taking a series of portraits. Hey, great idea. Have the person hold the gray card up, meter off of this, take your first picture with them holding the gray card to make sure you have a good exposure, then get rid of it and simply shoot that exposure over and over and over again. Have your subject move and use different poses and things of that nature, different depth of fields, different lenses, things of that nature, so that you get the desired outcome. Find something mid-tone, meter off of it, take a picture, evaluate that picture, make your adjustment. Now you can continue your photography because you have gotten the information you need from your light meter. You have a good exposure. Now concentrate on your subject. Remember, try and find a mid-tone. Remember, the meter in your camera is a reflective meter. Remember, a handheld meter is also called an incident meter. Remember that you have different metering zones or metering patterns in your camera, and those can be useful for different situations. Read up in the book and online as to what these are like from your particular camera manufacturer. Okay? I know on some of the Nikon cameras, they actually let you adjust the size of this spot. So very helpful information in your owner's manual or online about your camera. Okay? So very helpful. The meters in these cameras are excellent. They do a wonderful job, but now we understand them a little bit more about how they work. Find a mid-tone, 18% gray. All right? Thanks very much.